Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It's been quite a while since I last uttered those words and there's been an awful lot going on in my personal life so I haven't been able to upload as many videos as I would like over the past few weeks. Well, to be honest, I haven't been able to do anything for just over a month now because I've been moving house and it's been absolute chaos getting everything together and getting set up in my new home. Plus I've had some issues with my tech. My PC likes to keep crashing on me and I'm trying to work through some of the bits and pieces there. Long story short, I'm okay. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who reached out to see how I was. There's some very kind people out there, and I want to say a big thank you to those people for checking in. I'm absolutely fine, and I do aim to be getting back to my usual output very soon, hopefully in the next few weeks, but it's going to take a little bit longer before I get fully set up and I work through these tech issues. I also want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to a big friend of the channel, which is Talon, who is also a content creator and has some fantastic stuff on his channel. So I fully encourage you to get over there and check it out. If you like my stuff, you're bound to love his stuff. Fully recommend it. So what are you waiting for? Go and check out some of his videos. Now, with all of that being said, I do have one video that I'm able to share with you. This is one I intended to make earlier, but didn't get around to it. So I can finally share with you my thoughts on the Hot Toys 1/6 scale Batman from the Justice League. Now, I should preface this by saying that this is actually my first ever Hot Toys figure. Now, Hot Toys, as I'm sure many of you out there are well aware, is really the market leader and set the high benchmark for the industry when it comes to 1/6 scale figures. However, this one is from a few years ago, around about 2017, 2018, and there's definitely some issues with it. All that glitters is not gold, and I will get into the weeds on some of those issues. But as ever, let's start off by taking a look at the packaging. Now, this packaging, I have to say, is actually slightly broader than most of my other 1/6 scale figure packaging. It's quite a wide box, which is either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your general point of view. Obviously, it's great. It's a broader canvas in terms of having some fantastic artwork to put on display, but on the negative side, it does make it a lot harder to store and put on display if you're a little bit stretched in terms of space. Now, the actual image itself is quite colourful. There's a bit of a purple sepia going over it, so it's quite colourful. They've opted for an image, a promotional image taken from the film of Ben Affleck's Batman, which is quite striking. I think it looks pretty good, and we can sort of see the Justice League branding on it. It's not the most exciting packaging in the world, but I think this is fairly presentable. It's still fairly displayable, and it looks pretty good. It does the job. Now, this design does wrap all the way around the packaging, so on the side panel we can see the end of his arm there, and that's really it. There's not an awful lot else going on. In terms of this side panel, we can see the name of the character, so if you decide to stack these up with others in the collection on your shelf, you can tell the characters apart, and that's about it. It's a shame. This feels like a wasted opportunity to have something a bit more interesting in terms of the art style. Again, if we look at the back of the packaging, not an awful lot going on here. We just have the slogan from the film, "You can't save the world alone," and then some of the small print down there in terms of credits. Again, a bit of a wasted opportunity, I think, but hey, what are you going to do? Of course, this is only the outer sleeve, so this does lift off, and underneath we can see the window display that shows the figure and all of his various accessories, which looks pretty nice. There's not really a lot in the way of borders here to decorate, and if we look at the back of the packaging, we can see this also is pretty bland. It just has the Bat logo there, and that's it. Again, some small prints, and it's not even that colourful. So this is a little bit understated and a bit muted for my liking. Okay, so let's take a look at the figure itself, and there's no denying that visually this is very, very impressive. It looks pretty screen accurate to my eyes, and it looks like a high quality 1/6 scale figure. There's a lot of details and texture just by looking at it from a distance. You can see that, and it also has a really interesting display base as well, making this overall a very attractive, very interesting display piece. Taking a look at the head sculpt, we can see that this is actually pretty screen accurate. I think they've done a nice job here, all in all. Now, of course, most of this head is covered in a cowl, and there's not an awful lot of paint apps when it comes to that cowl, but the cowl does have a leather effect. It has that kind of texture. It's actually made of a sort of a rubbery plastic, but it does have a depth to it, which is quite nice to the touch, and it definitely gives the impression that it's like a leather cowl, which is pretty cool. Now, the ear ratio seems to be pretty spot on from what I can tell, and you can definitely see a strong resemblance to Ben Affleck here in the faceplate, in that jawline and around the lips there. There's no denying that this is a really solid likeness, where we have those details, which is great. I do really like the paint apps on the faceplate. We can see the stubble very clearly there, which is great, and yet the tones seem very natural in terms of skin tone and the lips there, which is fantastic. The most impressive part of this sculpt though, for me, is actually the eyes. The way they've been painted is really spectacular. As you can see, if you look closely, they actually glint, they catch the light perfectly, and it gives it that lifelike quality, which is really impressive. Moving on to the body then, the first thing to note is that actually the body's made up of a very thick rubber underlay, a bit of a bodysuit if you will, underneath the actual costume. Now this definitely presents some issues and some challenges when it comes to articulation, because it really does restrict and limit the motion, as we'll see a little bit later. But on top of that body is this sort of latex PVC kind of bodysuit, the bat suit really, that goes over it. Now obviously this is form-fitting, and again adds to that restriction. This definitely causes some challenges when you do bend the joints, because you can see this creasing, as you can see in the crux of the arm there, which looks a little bit weird. It doesn't look quite right. But otherwise, the actual presentation of this torso looks really quite good. There's actually an awful lot of detail here. Each individual line that you can see there is actually a groove cut into the outfit, so you can run your finger over that and feel all the different textures, which is fantastic. The bat symbol looks to be pretty well proportioned and pretty accurate to what I would expect, and the overall texture is actually quite nice, because having that bodysuit, when you do push it and press in, it does actually feel like it's got, well, it feels like a rubber suit, but it feels more realistic, I suppose. It feels more like a human body in a weird way. It's quite hard to explain, but it has a nice texture to it that is quite pleasing, which is quite effective. So that is definitely very good. The utility belt is also really nicely presented as well. This is actually a plastic piece, and it does feel quite plastic-like actually, and quite light to the touch. However, there's a number of really nice details on here. I think the paint apps are exceptional. We can actually see individual cuts and grooves in it where he's been in battle, which is a nice touch as well. So it is a battle-damaged belt, which is kind of cool. But again, those paint apps are really nicely done. It actually looks quite layered and quite textured. There's a number of different washes running through it to give it that sense of texture and depth, which I'm always talking about. But hey, this looks really, really good, and yeah, I can't really fault this. Likewise, if we look at the hands and the gauntlets, we can see that these are really nicely done. I do like the gold tip tones on the knuckles and on the blades on top of the gauntlet there. I think they look really, really cool. Again, in terms of proportions, they all look really good, and they are plastic pieces as well going over the bodysuit, which looks pretty cool. Now, the only thing I would say about the hands is that they do have a tendency to want to pop off rather too easily for my liking, and they do tend to push up against the gauntlet, which is a little bit frustrating. However, they look really cool, and you can see that even the gloves on the inside of the palm there's an awful lot of detailing and lines and texture, which is really cool. Likewise, the same applies to the boots. These look really good. The shoes, I suppose, are a separate piece to the rest of the boot, which is good. That allows for articulation, as we'll see a little bit later, and it's fairly neatly disguised. You can see the break there, but it's kind of subtle actually. They've done a good job of that overall. Again, we can see the tips of the boots there, some gold highlights, which just add a little bit more colour and life to the figure as well, which is great. Of course, that is screen accurate as well, but it adds something to this figure, which I think is really nice. I'm pleased to say that Hot Toys have been generous with the cape. They give us plenty of material here to really maximise the effect of the cape, which is brilliant. So if you hold it out there, you can see this has got quite a broad wingspan, which is great. So you can wrap this around him, have it hanging in front of him, or you can fold it back and have it over his shoulder as well, which is a nice touch. Now, you'll notice that the outer texture is actually mirrored on the inside of the inlay of the cape as well for part of it, which is great. So that means that when you're having it on display, it can look fairly consistent rather than having two different textures depending on how you decide to display the cape on or over the shoulder. And the material of the cape is kind of interesting on the outside because it's got a leathery look and feel to it, but also feels quite battered and worn. And at first I wasn't sure whether there's just something wrong with mine, but I think this is intentional, and I think it's actually meant to be fairly screen accurate. So again, it's a nice touch. It feels quite weighty as well, which is great, but without being too heavy that drags the figure down. And if we look at the hem of the cape as well, you can see that it's actually quite uneven. It's not nice and neat. Again, I believe that this is intentional. And then very quickly, I want to touch on the display base that it comes with as well, because this is very cool. You can actually see a defeated, dead parademon here, which is really very nicely done. I think this is really actually quite striking in its own right. Of course, it is one single piece. It's just molded into one piece. There's no moving parts or anything like that. But again, there's actually a lot of detail here in terms of the soldiers' details that we can see. Nice sculpting, some nice paint taps. We can see different textures there between the soldier, the actual dirt of the ground, the stonework, and I think this looks really impressive. And of course, you can place your Batman to stand on top of him as well, which makes for a very eye-catching display. So moving on to the articulation, first thing to note is that there's not really any in the head. It doesn't really move from side to side. This is very static. Now, there is ball joints in the shoulders though that will allow the arms to lift up and out. Again, this is fairly limited because of the bodysuit that they've got underneath, and of course the one on top as well. There is also a butterfly joint there, but you're not going to get an awful lot out of this. It wants to kind of revert back to default, so it's just kind of standing stationary really, which is unfortunate. Of course, if you do lift it up, you can see all that creasing in the costume, which is less than ideal. There is a bicep swivel that will allow the arm to rotate around, which is good, and of course there is a double joint at the elbow there as well, which will allow the lower arm to lift up to about 90 degrees. You're not really going to be able to push it further than that because of the articulation issues that I've already kind of touched on. That will also swivel at the top of the forearm there as well, which is great. And of course there is a ball joint in the wrist, allowing the hand to rotate all the way around and sort of hinge forwards and backwards. It will do this, but again, that hand will pop off a little bit too easily for my liking, which makes this a little bit frustrating, to be honest. As for the torso, there does appear to be a ball joint at the waist that will allow the figure to sort of turn left and right, but not an awful lot. In fact, bare minimum, I would say. Likewise, there does seem to be a bit of an ab crunch somewhere in the torso area that will allow him to bend forwards and backwards a little bit, but again, this is minimal motion here. There's really very, very little give. Things massively improve when it comes to the legs. There is a ball joint in the hips, allowing the legs to kick out to the side quite a good distance, although I do want to point out that this costume does feel like it might tear, which does give me pause for thought when it comes to posing this. Now, there does seem to be a thigh swivel as well up there, and speaking of that tearing, I just want to point out, if you look at the knee on my one here, you can see there's a slight fraying there. It's very subtle at the moment, but I don't think it would do well under a lot of pressure, a lot of posing. I think over time we'll see this wear and tear quite a bit. Now, the legs will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards. There is a double joint at the knee, allowing that leg to kick back to about 90 degrees, and then we do have a ball joint in the ankle there, allowing the foot to pivot from side to side and hinge forwards and backwards ever so slightly. Okay, so let's take a look at the accessories, of which there are many. So first up, he has an additional 5 hands, all sorts of closed fist, gripping hands, open palm hands. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Then he also has 2 interchangeable face plates and 2 interchangeable eye plates, so that you can change these around to change his expression, I suppose, which is pretty cool. These are all held into place with magnets. He does come with an alternate Bruce Wayne head, which looks fantastic. I think this is a really great head sculpt, a really nice likeness. Again, fantastic paint apps. And then, of course, he comes with 2 versions of the Grapple Gun and all their bits and pieces as well, in terms of having things either ready to shoot out, things that have shot out, various different sizes and elements of the grapple, opening, closed, extending, which is all very cool. And then he also has 3 batarangs, which is absolutely fantastic. Probably more than you need, but pretty cool nevertheless. But that's not all, because he also comes with this fantastic parademon weapon as well, this sort of laser cannon assault rifle, which looks really, really cool, very nicely sculpted, very well painted. And then he also has his wrist gauntlet display as well. Now, this is a plastic piece that is held together with a magnet that just taps onto his wrist gauntlet nice and easily. And for the most part, is pretty effective. It does have a tendency to slide off when you try to reposition him or put him in a different pose, so that's something to be mindful of. But otherwise, it looks pretty cool. And of course, because of the various different hands he comes with, he has no issues holding his big rifle either. So he can neatly get his thumb onto the trigger here, which is pretty cool. He can grip this nice and tightly, and he does have the flat hand to kind of support it as well. It is quite a big piece, so it tends to look better in certain poses rather than others, but I think this looks pretty cool. It could have been a bit more flush, I think, with the hand gripping it underneath, but I think it certainly does the job, and it looks pretty impressive. Likewise, having the different choices of faceplate here to have different expressions, angry, neutral, somewhat pleased, I think work really well for creating different looks with these fantastic accessories. And again, he has no issues holding his various grapple guns. Both look really cool. Both are very nicely painted with a lot of detail in the sculpting as well, which is fantastic. And he has no issues holding either or both of these at the same time, which is great. Now, the grapple gun in particular is particularly interesting because it does have all those various different options when it comes to the grapple coming out there ready to spring fire, actually extended, and then of course actually firing out in various different lengths as well, which is pretty impressive, quite thoughtful of Hot Toys to give us all these different options, and it creates a number of different looks for Batman as well, which is great. As I mentioned earlier, I do really like the faceplate with the magnets. I think this works really well, because you can just pop that off just by simply removing it. Underneath you can see this rather ugly display, but that's fine, because under each faceplate there is a magnet there that when you slot that into place holds it nice and securely. And thankfully I've had no issues with this falling off, so this seems to work really well. Now, I haven't experimented with the eyes because that seems to be quite an ordeal to be able to do this, involving all sorts of extra tools, and to be honest, I don't really want my Batman looking from side to side. I just want to look him straight on, so I haven't been able to demonstrate this to you, but if you want, you can swap out the eyes as well. It just doesn't seem quite worth it to me. And of course, I mustn't forget that he does have his batarangs, and obviously has no issues holding these. These are really cool. Of course, they're core to any Batman figure. You're going to want a batarang or two, and he looks absolutely fantastic with them, and he's able to grip them nice and securely without any issues of them falling through his fingers or anything like that, and it just looks great. Now, at this point, it was my intention to show you how to swap the heads out so you can display your Bruce Wayne head. As you can see, you've got the cowled head there, just slides off nice and easily, and underneath we have this rather strange plastic-looking skeleton, and this is on a ball joint, so it should be a case of simply popping that off, right? Well, no, because it actually snapped off. A clean break here, as you can see, where the plastic has actually come away completely from this very tiny hole in the base of the neck. Now, I looked into this, and this seems to be a recurring problem with Hot Toys of this period. So Batman is by no means unique, and my experience is not unique either. This happened to a great many people, leading to a lot of frustration. So I thought it's only right to forewarn you. Do not attempt this if you have this model and have not done so far, because the chances are it's going to snap. But anyway, with that being said, here is how the figure should have looked, and you can kind of get around this with a bit of glue, but you're going to kind of have to settle on which head you want, and I'll be honest, I'm going to stick with the cowled head as opposed to the Ben Affleck head. No offense, Ben. But yeah, as you can see, this was a very nice head sculpt. It is a really good likeness, and I couldn't really fault it, and it's a shame that this does not work the way it is intended. And it's also disappointing to end my overview and my closer look at on such a sour note as well, because otherwise this is a pretty nice figure. It's actually got a lot of great qualities. I really do like the texturing of the costume, the extra padding in the torso, the cape I think is really cool. All of his accessories are absolutely fantastic, and I think as a display piece it looks really top notch. Like, it is really cool, and these are supposed to be displayed, of course. They're not really meant to be put in many poses, but they are still an action figure, and you are supposed to be able to pose them to create different looks when you have them on display. And I think that's where this figure really falls down, because the articulation is extremely limited. Whenever you do try to pose it, you're going to have difficulties with the hands popping off. There's going to be tears over time, inevitably, in the costume because of the way it's made, and then you're going to struggle just to get it in many different poses anyway. He's going to be a fairly static figure all in all. There's not going to be much you're going to be able to do with him. And then of course you throw in that frankly inexcusable issue with the with the swapping of the heads. Like, such a weird design, and so badly put together. I find that really surprising for such a top quality brand like Hot Toys, how they could just do that, really. So, all in all, I've got mixed feelings. I think it looks great, but there's definitely a lot of issues with this figure. I still am glad to have it in my collection, but I think it's one that if you are going to track this down now on the secondary market, I wouldn't put too high a price on it. I would dial that back a little bit and just go in with the foreknowledge that you're going to have a few issues with it. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.